Hello, geography students. I want to go through some notes with you right now so that when we're in class that we can actually do a little bit of work so we don't have to take a lot of time doing the notes. So we'll be getting through some of the early um, history of the United States and how it was formed and how our economy has developed. So this should have been the last slide that you did. And then we talked in class about the importance of the Transcontinental Railroad, which then later brought out the importance of the highway system and the interstate system. So let's talk about, oops, sorry, let's talk about the shaping of the land and how the United States became the United States and how we became a government system. So early on, keep in mind that we talk about the United States as like being a nation, um, but there were people, millions and millions of people living here long before the United States was ever a nation. And so we have to remember that indigenous people, Native American people, had their cultures. They had very strong cultures. They had like a religious system. They had trade. So don't feel like Europeans were the first, to find America, if you will, because we do know that the early migration happened from Asia, and they people walked across what used to be known as a land bridge. And there were also Spanish settlements in the Southwest. And so, as think of where Mexico is today, as people kind of started to filter up in from New Mexico as well. So there were Native American cultures, there were Spanish settlements, and then there's also going to be European settlements. The British, the Dutch, the French, all of those European settlers started more from the northeast. So it's kind of from all different kind of angles of the United States that we see the patterns of settlement and the patterns of how the government was established. So what's important to know is this idea of the Columbian Exchange. Now, if you didn't know this, do not feel bad. So Christopher Columbus um, founded, you know, the West Indies. Well, what had happened is he was on a mission. He was on a journey to find a quicker route to Asia, especially to India. And so when he accidentally lands in what we call the Caribbean today, in the West Indies today, he thought he had come upon India, when in fact he hadn't really. And so a lot of people think like Christopher Columbus should be looked at as both a hero and maybe a villain. But the idea here is that he began what was called the Columbian Exchange. And the Columbian Exchange is just this, for good and bad. It is what it is. And this is based off of Christopher Columbus. So after Christopher Columbus found the new world, but again, he didn't find anything that wasn't already there, that people weren't already living on and inhabiting and taking care of for generations and millennia, actually. But he did kind of usher in this system of trade. And what we need to look at is that chart right there. It's not only the exchange of goods, but it's also the exchange of people. And when I say people, that unfortunately is the institution of slavery. People started using human beings to do work. Now, slavery has been around for ages. Greek people had slavery, Egyptian people had slavery, but now it was a little bit different. Now it was more for work, whereas before it was probably people were sold into slavery more because they were conquered, or kind of a punishment system. This now institution was for labor purposes. And so all of those goods, you can see the things that would go back to Europe and the things that would come from Europe and Africa and come back to what we call the Americas. So it was this exchange of goods, people, and diseases across the Atlantic. So eventually, there's going to be control over this territory, especially in the Northeast, where the French and the Dutch, and probably most influentially the English, start to control. And it's going to lead to the American Revolution. Think about the Declaration of Independence and Independence Day on July 4th. The American Revolution is going to give America its independence. So they're going to break away from Britain, who at that point in 1776 was probably the richest, most powerful country empire in the world. So like this small group of like people who are trying to break away from the strongest country in the world seems a little like, what are you thinking? Like, is this a good idea? Should we really be doing this? Should we be waging a war on this very powerful navy and this very powerful army? But they did, and the patriot movement won. And so now America has their independence. And what really changes is what we heard a little bit about with the Lewis and Clark documentary when the Louisiana Territory was purchased. This is now through our third president, Thomas Jefferson, and he was able to purchase this area of Louisiana from France. France was going through their own revolution. They were broke, they were in debt, and they needed to sell some land. And the United States grabbed it. We bought it. And so that really doubled the size of our new country, of this increased area of the United States. And this is in 1803. So now if you can picture the United States, before the United States had kind of ended where the Mississippi River ran, so from the East Coast to the Mississippi. Well, now it runs from the East Coast way into the farthest regions of like Washington State. Not all of the West and not all of the Southwest, but a big area. So this was a big impact on the United States. When the nation is essentially doubled in size, it becomes very industrialized. We go through what we know as the Industrial Revolution, where things are being invented and people are coming up with more efficient ways to make things for technology. And we became also very urban because the centers of these industrialized areas and technologically advanced areas were in the cities, which makes sense, right? So there's a great picture. Now we're seeing buildings that are more than 2 stories. We see smokestacks, we see factories, but we also see some unfortunate things like pollution and maybe overcrowding. So some of these things, there's always the good and the bad. You always have to look at how things progressed, and progress is usually a good thing. Can it bring about bad consequences? And in the United States, sometimes that is definitely the case. People began moving westward to find land and resources. In that area of what we call the Northeast, like the first 13 colonies, after they became states, they were running out of room. Think about how small those states are. I really tested you on your states and capitals test if you knew those, because those are really kind of smashed in there in the Northeast. So people began moving westward, go west. And suburbs eventually are developed as cities expanded because of industries. It's not so much here in North Dakota, but you can even think of, Fargo as Fargo as being the city, and then the suburbs developing around it. So West Fargo is now probably considered a suburb. Maybe even Moorhead, to an extent, is considered to be a suburb. Things like Harwood and Horace, those are all suburbs of Fargo. But you know what a suburb is when we're talking really, really big cities. And those are expanding because that's where people are living, and then they're going into work in the cities. Today, 80% of people live in urban areas. 80%, We've got 330 million people or something like that, and 80% of those people, that's a lot of people living in the cities. That means you have to have good infrastructure, you have to have good road systems, you have to have good power grids, so people can live and have like a quality of life. So this increased the need for transportation, but it also increased the level of poverty. Where we see most poverty tends to be in the cities. If and then we see homelessness mostly in the urban areas, in the cities, but then we see poverty levels starting to creep into the suburbs as we go further out. And these are all the social impacts of what was happening as the United States was developing, and even yet today. So, how's our government system set up? When you get into senior year, you are going to take POD1 and POD2, and that's what these next two slides are all about. The government of the United States we are a democracy. We are a republic that is both a republic and a democracy. So I'll explain both of these ideas. The first idea is how we are a federal republic. This means the idea of federalism means that there is a separation between the federal and state powers. And so the federal government is like the national government, like the big government. And they get to make some laws and they get to decide things. But then the state powers is more on a local level. What can the states do? And you'll understand this very well. Now, in our time of COVID, Governor Bergen just changed our kind of our laws, and now we're looking at maybe mask mandates and things like that. Well, then it even goes a little bit further, and Governor Bergen is saying, well, what's right for Cass County might not be right for Eddy County, so you have to do what's best for you. And that's kind of the idea of federalism. Each state gets to decide what's best for them, but overall, the government, the federal government, also has some control. And now we'll talk about the separation of powers. So not only do we have a federal republic, we also have what's called a representative democracy. And when I say a representative democracy, we've talked about this before, it's that somebody is going to represent you. We don't have a strict democracy or what's called a direct democracy because it wouldn't make sense for everybody who's of voting age, everybody over the age of 18, to go to either their state capital or their nation's capital, let's say for Washington, D.C., or Bismarck, North Dakota, and legislate and make laws and take part in the government, because that just logically, logistically wouldn't make sense. And so we elect somebody to represent us. We want other people to carry out the government function because I'm a teacher and I don't have time to do all that. But I'm going to choose somebody who I think will be the best person at representing me. And so how we do this is set up through the separation of powers. We have three branches of government: the legislative branch, which is the Senate and the House of Representatives. Usually we look at, and the legislative branch is the first branch of government to ever be set up. In fact, for quite a while, like maybe more than 10 years, it was the only branch of government that we had. And then we realized we needed something a little bit stronger. So we made what's called the executive branch, and that's the president. We're going through a presidential election right now. And then the judicial branch was also deemed important, and this is the Supreme Court. Now, each of these branches, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, all can kind of have a little bit of control and say over what the other two do. But nobody has more power than another. And so it's really kind of a brilliant separation of government power, because we don't want any one person or any one group getting too powerful. And so this is how our government was set up. And thankfully, the way our government was set up is basically what has allowed our economy to work the way it has in the United States. we have what's called a free market economy. Now, we talked about this a little bit in the last chapter. It's not strictly a free market. We have sometimes it's called a mixed market, but on the whole, businesses can really kind of run as they want. People can have a business and they can pretty much do what they want in their business. They can hire who they want, they can fire who they want, they can pay people as much as they want, they can work as much as they want, except, of course, there are some restrictions. For example, I'm not sure if any of you have a job or if you will have a job, but there's a minimum wage in North Dakota. I believe it's $7.25. So if you own a business, let's say you're going to go work at Hornbachers, the person who owns Hornbachers has to pay you, the government says, at least $7.25 an hour. They can pay you more than that. They can pay you anything they want, but they have to at least pay you that. So this is the idea that there's some restrictions. It's not completely a free market, but on the essence, on the whole, it's you have a lot of rights and freedoms as a business owner. And that's just the idea of capitalism. You can produce what you want, you can make what you want, you can run your business however you see fit. And nobody's going to tell you kind of what you can and cannot do. I always think of that book, The Giver. You know how if you were assigned a job and maybe the job wasn't right for you, I always think about how that would not be a really great system and a really great way to live, because it seems really constricting. So there we have our economic system. So you can see we are more capitalist leaning. We rely on market competition, which means this idea of supply and demand. If I'm going to make it, I got to make sure somebody wants to buy it. So let's say I want to go into making pens. Well, I can make whatever kind of pen I want, but if it's a crummy pen, nobody's going to buy it. So if I don't sell pens, well, then I'm not going to make any money. So I better start making the kind of pens that people want to buy. That's the competition. That's where capitalism becomes exciting, when people try to innovate and make a product or a business as not only profitable but useful as possible. So the United States, even yet today, although we are getting really close to China, China is a very close second. We have the largest economy in the world. And that's in large part because of our labor supply. We have a lot of hardworking people in the United States. We don't force those people to work, but we do have a lot of opportunities for people to have a job. And also because of our natural resources. You know, all of chapter 5 was really about our natural resources and how blessed and bountiful North America really is with resources. That's a big reason why we have such a strong economy. We have great technology. We have brilliant people who make things and create things and develop things. And so we have a really good technologically advanced system. And we also have a stable political system. And what I mean by that is we don't have a lot of rioting. We don't have a lot of overthrow of the government. We don't have a lot of people who are trying to assassinate government officials, because it's a pretty stable. Once again, probably because of the separation of those three branches of government. And so we are a pretty stable. We don't have a ton of war in our country and things like that. So it can allow our economy to then flourish and continue. So that was a lot of notes. Thanks for keeping up with me. If you have any questions, let me know, and we will see you in class to get some of the work done on our regions of the United States. Talk to you later. Bye.